Our presentation tonight is called Millennial Madness. Millennial Madness. We've been looking at this alliance. I think we left off last time with this alliance. We're calling it kind of the Antichrist alliance or the counterfeit trinity that we see in Revelation 13. We have the dragon that's spearheading it all, and then we have the sea beast and the land beast, who are in another place in Revelation 16 called the beast and the false prophet. And so these three are forming an alliance, and they're going after the church. And it's the huge part of the battle that isn't a physical one as much as it is a battle of ideas. It's between truth and error. And so we're going to touch on some of that and what that looks like here tonight. It's clear from the warnings of Christ and the apostles that our greatest enemy is doing everything he can to destroy the church. And it may come to a surprise to some of you, but maybe not so much. He's not doing it from outside. It's not Christians versus secular atheist people. It's not unbelievers attacking believers, even though I know sometimes it feels like that can happen. But the devil's a little smarter than that, and he's attacking the church from within. He did this initially. We looked at the falling away during the 4th century that it began in the church, and we saw what that looked like, and then now we're seeing this falling away continue in the world as well, and it's happening from within. And so I want to go back to Paul's warning about this falling away in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, and I want to show you, at least this time, what he says about how Satan does it, how he's causing the church to fall away. And so we know, we've talked about how this son of perdition, this man of sin comes up and all that. Well, these are the very next verses that follow that. And it says in verse 9, "The coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan, with all power, signs, and lying wonders, and with all unrighteous deception among those who perish. Because," and here's the reason, "because they did not receive the love of the truth that they might be saved." Now you might say, okay, these are the heathen, they don't follow the truth, so they're not wanting to be saved. It's not about that. The context of this passage is what's happening in the church. This is a letter to the church. This is a warning for the church. And so this mindset that I hear out there, this battle that we got to, take back, restore God in this country and all these things, morality has gone back. Well, that's true. It's happening. But the mindset, the worldview of believers versus unbelievers is not what the Bible says is happening. It's an attack that comes from within. Today, after, of course, 1,000+ years now of this falling away, we have learned one of the objectives of the little horn that was in Daniel 7 and Daniel 8, that also is the same as the sea beast in Revelation 13, same entity. Because we know that because the characteristics are the same exact descriptions of them almost. But it says here of the little horn that he cast truth to the ground and prospered. That's the goal, to cast truth to the ground and to prosper. And so what I'm seeing here with this text about not receiving the love of the truth that they might be saved, it's really telling us that it matters what you believe. It does matter what you believe. Because belief sets you up for what happens in your life then after that. Okay? So belief in Christ brings you salvation, it justifies you, and you begin that road, that walk with him. But then what you believe from him through his word then sets your course. And if you believe things that are contrary to the word, you will fall away. And so having the truth in our minds and our hearts helps us to know what God is doing in this world, but also it exposes what the enemy is doing as well. And it gives us an opportunity to navigate the deception that is out there in the last days. And that's what really prophecy is all about. Exposing the deceiver, his system, how to avoid it, and how to find God's truth and hold on to it. How about that? I'll sit down and we're done. That's what it's about. Okay, so how does error find its way into the church then? Because we see this is coming in. This is the church not receiving the love of the truth. They've accepted other forms of teaching that are error. And so we find this next verse in 2 Corinthians, also from Paul, by the way. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 13. Listen to this. He describes them. He says, "For such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into apostles of" who? Christ. So again, this isn't from outside trying to deceive. This is inside the church. People, false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into apostles of Christ. Listen to this, it gets worse. "And no wonder, for Satan himself transforms himself into an angel of light. Therefore, it's no great thing if his ministers," did we just read that right? Did you know the devil has ministers? "Until his ministers also transform themselves into ministers of righteousness, whose end will be according to their works." In other words, they're not ministers of righteousness, but they transform themselves into that. So that's why I've said in the past, I've encouraged all of you, don't just believe what I tell you. Don't believe what anybody tells you just because they're a preacher or a teacher, they're on YouTube, they're in front of a church. You need to know that there could be some wolves in sheep's clothing, and you need to verify, as the Bereans did, that the things that they're saying are according to the Word of God. Amen? This is why Paul commanded Timothy now. So Timothy was a pastor in a local church established there by Paul. And so Paul writes to him 2 letters, and this is in his first letter, or second letter, excuse me. And he says to Timothy, listen, preach the word. Be ready in season and out of season. Convince, rebuke, exhort with all long-suffering and teaching. Let me tell you, that right there is called apologetics. I mentioned this word before. It's defending the faith. It's defending our beliefs as Christians from the Word of God. I love that aspect of teaching, the defense of our faith. And so he tells Pastor Timothy, preach the word and defend the faith. And then he goes on, for the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but according to their own desires, because they have itching ears, they will heap up for themselves teachers, and they will turn their ears away from the truth and be turned aside to fables. Again, another reference yet to the falling away. And if the falling away began in the 4th century, do you think it's better now? It's not as bad, or you think it might be a little worse even? A lot worse. So people today, it's this reference to itching ears. I don't know if you've seen this in Christianity. There's a lot more movement or following of the heart that is based on the emotions rather than following of the mind based on the testimony of Scripture. So it used to be, and it was for a long time, the word was preached, people received the word, and they applied it to their lives, and that's how they were led by the Lord. Now times, what we're seeing a lot more of is an appeal to the motions. And it's running the gamut of everything to just gain an emotional response that opens then the mind to whatever is being preached. And there's little accountability for the word. And that's one of the concerns I have with today's Christianity in America. We'll see a little bit more about this here in the near future because I have some specific examples. All right, so here's something else. Jude chapter 1, there's only one chapter of Jude, verse 4. Listen to what Jude says. Certain individuals whose condemnation was written about long ago, in other words, we knew it was going to happen a long time ago, have secretly slipped in among you. Secretly slipped in among you. And so this is the reality of the day that we live in. And so I encourage you, like never before, to study yourselves for yourselves and follow the word. Through lies and deception, the devil has brought his false teaching into the Christian church. And that's why I believe even today the Reformation must continue. The Protestant Reformation that began, most people ascribe that at the beginning to Martin Luther. We talked about this last night. But that Reformation hasn't ended. It's not over. As long as there is a battle between truth and error, the Reformation continues. In other words, the bringing to light the truths of God's Word. As we saw in the previous session, after the Reformation happened, you had this counter-Reformation. And the dissemination of a different way, a different narrative of reading prophecy specifically. And so where historicism, which is prophecy that's rooted in history and unfolds in an unbroken line to the very end, the alternative way they offered to look at prophecy, there are two ways actually, was preterism and futurism. Preterism being, it's all already happened, don't worry about it. Futurism is, it's only going to happen, it's all happening in the future, so don't worry about it now. But it's coming. And that was the work of the Counter-Reformation. And on the heels of the Counter-Reformation then, it didn't take long for other types of theology to kind of pair with that, to form with this new ideology, this new methodology of interpretation of prophecy, and it began to blend. And specifically what I'm talking about here is dispensationalism. Dispensationalism is a theological system that divides the Bible into two divinely appointed ages. Ages of time that God used in his interactions with the world. The line of division is usually the two testaments, Old Testament, New Testament. Its teachings are built from the idea that God relates to Israel, as in the Old Testament, differently than he relates to the church, the New Testament. And so this bifurcation happens. It's a dispensation of time, old and new. Now, I recognize there's a dispensation of time in regard to the law that pointed to Christ who would come in the Old Testament, and then the dispensation of Christ who has come and has fulfilled those elements of the law and now is our Savior and is our mediator in heaven for our salvation and our continued sanctification. So that, I understand that part of dispensationalism, but that's not what this is. This is a complete different teaching. And so we can find the line of progression here from futurism into dispensationalism by looking at some of the people in history. Now we know the first name that comes up is not a surprise to you. You heard about him last night, Francisco Ribera, a Spanish Jesuit theologian, the father of futurism. He was the one working during this Counter-Reformation period to propose a new way of looking at prophecy, to deflect attention away from the papacy and the Church of Rome being the Antichrist, because that was the word out there and it was growing very quickly. So this was out there. Then number two, you have someone coming along by the name of St. Robert Bellarmine. He's another Italian Jesuit theologian, and he's a major contributor as well to the Counter-Reformation of the late 1500s, early 1600s. Then after that, you have Dr. S.R. Maitland, Archbishop of Canterbury. This teaching then comes to England, and it grows. He was known to be what's called the kind of quote-unquote keeper of the 1593 manuscript, that is Ribera's manuscript of futurism. So he was also a champion of futurist ideas as far as prophecy is concerned. But then you have this appearance of dispensationalism with a gentleman, next slide please, by the name of John Nelson Darby. He's the father of modern futurism and dispensationalism. In other words, he used futurism and then created some theology out of futurism, which is we now know today to be dispensationalism. And it is spread throughout the Protestant churches early to mid-1800s. That's when he was most influential. But then what took his teachings to a new level, and especially in America, was someone's name who you might understand or have heard of before, Cyrus Scofield. Anybody heard of Scofield's study Bible? Okay. He's an American theologian, and he brought dispensational theology to the States in the late 1800s through his reference Bible, and it was extremely popular. It began to go out to conferences across denominations, and this we find kind of in the late 1800s, early 1900s, kind of an explosion of, mostly 1900s, but explosion of dispensationalism and the theology behind that. Okay? So today it's broadly accepted by charismatic and evangelical churches especially, but not limited to them exclusively. Okay. Dispensational theology has impacted the entire Christian belief system within Protestantism. It's fundamentally changed from what the reformers, the Protestant reformers, intended it to be. And it affects primarily, and not limited to these, but primarily the big ones, it affects theology on Israel and the church, on salvation and the atonement, the covenants, and law and grace and how that's understood, the Ten Commandments, second coming and the resurrection, apocalyptic prophecy, that's the futurist part of it, and the millennial reign of Christ. Okay? All those truths of God's word were seen in a different light as futurism then merged with, or at least became complementary to, this new theological system of dispensationalism. All right, so we're going to look at some of these teachings, a few of these here in the next few nights, so Thursday, Friday, Saturday of next week. We'll get into some of these, especially I give a presentation on Israel specifically. So we'll take a look at that, because the difference in the worldview from dispensational Christians, dispensationalists, and how they view Israel is fundamentally different from how others have historically viewed Israel. So we're going to look at that. And I think that presentation is next on Thursday night when we come back. Okay, so Revelation, we understood this. So this is just another quick recap, can be divided into two parts, with a bridge in the middle. Remember, after an introduction, chapters 2 through 11, historical events from the ascension of Christ, the initial time of Christ, ascension, and into heaven, and until the second coming. That is the first chapters, or the first part, chapters 2 through 11. Then you have this bridge, chapter 12, this cosmic battle, this war that occurs in heaven, which ends or starts between God and Satan, but then ends with Satan attacking the church. And then chapters 13 through 22 are all about final events down to the last days, to the earth being restored. A day that we are all looking forward to. Amen. The earth restored and made new. I mean, listen, this is what you really get excited about, right? what God's going to do when it's all over. If you ever wondered what creation would it look like to see God create the world, you're going to get to see it right in front of your eyes. Have you ever thought about that? You're going to see God speak and bring things into existence again. You're going to go, oh, it'll be like overload, like my cat in the window with birds. This is too much. I mean, that's just my imagination running away with me, right? But I'm so looking forward to that. We just need to get through the difficult part here in the last days, and I know the Lord will get us through there, but that's why we're talking about these things that we're talking about. Okay, so the second half, and again as a recap, this second half here begins in chapter 13 by revealing this alliance between the three powers. In that case, it was the dragon who kind of comes in, you see him in chapter 12, then the sea beast, the beginning of chapter 13, and then the land beast, chapter 14. And we saw who the sea beast was. It was the same as the little horn, the Church of Rome. But we did not identify who this beast that rises up from the land yet. And that's what we're going to do here tonight. So Revelation 13:11, on the heels of that sea beast and the description there that we saw, we read these words about another beast. It says, coming up out of the earth. And he had two horns like a lamb, and he did what? He spoke like a dragon. So the coming up out of the earth is the first thing to look at to kind of help us begin to identify who this would be. Revelation tells us in chapter 17, verse 15, that the waters which you saw, where the harlot sits, are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So water is representation of a populated area. People, multitudes, nations, things happening. So then what would the earth be coming up out of the earth? The opposite. A sparse area, sparsely populated area, not the hub, not the center of world civilization and activity going on. This is more of a much more rural, where things just aren't at the present time. Okay? So this beast, which we know represents a kingdom or a nation, right, rises up in a place where there just isn't many people. By the way, before this, if you recall, the feat of iron and clay, and then of course the 10 kingdoms divided, that's early Europe, right? Over time, Europe grows and things grow, but other parts of the world aren't growing. And I think this is an allusion very much so to that. So when does it arise? When does it come up? I put a little chart together that I think hopefully will be helpful. All right, so I gave you who it is, number one. I didn't mean to do that, but I gave you the answer, the USA, but here's why. Right around the late 18th century, you have the rise of the United States to power in an area that was sparsely populated, right? And then immediately after that, you have this fall, this deadly wound suffered by the papacy. And that we saw clearly in the first part of chapter 13, where it says, he suffered a deadly wound. This is the deadly wound that was suffered. So the rising up of the USA comes at around the time as the deadly wound is experienced by the papacy. What is that deadly wound? How was that deadly wound inflicted? Well, if you remember the Napoleonic Wars, one of the things Napoleon did was he basically removed the authority of Rome, the Church of Rome, over the Papal States. And his General Berthier, took the Pope captive in 1798, exiled him, where then he died. After that happened, after the papacy suffered its deadly wound and the church was now in limbo, Here, in this period, you have this rise of explosion, really, of Protestant churches. Why would they finally be able to explode and grow and come out? Because guess who's not enforcing, its authority, at least over Christendom at this time? But we also learned that at some point in the future, this deadly wound then heals, and that's why you have USA, the second beast, the beast from the earth, and the papacy, the sea beast, the first beast in Revelation 13. These two are forming that alliance with the dragon. Now, just a couple things, just kind of going off script. I have nothing negative to say about my country. I love my country. I love the United States. It's given us freedoms that you haven't seen around the rest of the world. And so in that respect, it's lamb-like, right? Remember, it looks like a lamb and speaks like a dragon. So it's lamb-like. But sometimes when it speaks or it acts out through legislation, through enforcement of its laws, whatever, it acts like a dragon. I mean, look what we did to the natives when we came over here. Look at the period of American slavery. I mean, you can't say that was lamb-like. So this nation has had its conflictions, right? Freedoms for religious worship, yet at the same time, oppression for certain people, where we act contrary to our Constitution. And we're not giving everybody the equal ability for life, liberty, and happiness. Notice also in the text, I know that we're beyond the actual reading, but it didn't say that there was any kind of a crown on this beast. So a crown is a symbol of a monarchy. And so that also fits the United States, where we are not a monarchy. We're a open, free society based on or built on separation of powers. And so we have the separation of powers throughout our system. You find it. We have 3 different branches of our government, and all these things are built-in protections along with the Bill of Rights for American citizens. And so, again, lamb-like, but in some ways speaks like a dragon. And if it once spoke like a dragon, do you think it can again? That's the question. And we will see that that's in fact what it does. So look at verse 12, this very next verse. He exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence. In other words, when he acts in authority, when he exercises his power, he's exercising it in the authority of the first beast, the sea beast. So here there's a comparison, there's a unison, a unified front between the Roman papacy and the United States of America. Okay? And it goes on, and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. That first beast, we talk about the wound that it suffered, and it came up, and at some point here it's going to completely heal. And that's when you're going to find this united front together acting in authority in concert to enforce what? Worship. In this passage, you will see over and over again, worship, worship, worship. It keeps coming back to it, worship. And then all of a sudden you see at the end, mark of the beast. Worship is the issue. Worship is the thing that they want to impose or they want to force. No, it says it causes. That word is compels. It forces worship. The Bible is telling us that the United States will use its power to compel worship, and specifically worship in the dogmas, or at least a dogma of the Church of Rome because it's partnered with her. I don't know if you've noticed the similarities between these two structures, but I'm going to put this picture up and it'll speak volumes. You ever noticed that before? There's a reason. I'm not much of a major conspiracy theory guy, but this screams at me. So now you know what the scripture actually, what prophecy is revealing is coming here as we get to these days that we're in even today as we speak. Now, historically, we would include the United States among nations with tensions between Catholics and Protestants. Okay, historically, we've seen that. Obviously, it was really bad. If you remember the days of Ireland and the battles between Catholics and Protestants, were very physical, armed conflicts. We never really reached that here in the States, but there's always been tensions. I don't know if you remember this, but a time when JFK became president. Remember John F. Kennedy when he rose to president? What was the big conversation amongst a lot of Christians about that? He was Catholic. This is the first Catholic we've ever had as the president. Oh, we're worried about that. You know why? Still within Protestantism, there's this lingering understanding that Rome is not what it pretends to be, right? Let me tell you, that's gone almost. Mostly gone. And so the second Catholic president has just come into power, well, a few years ago. And so we find very little conversation about him being Catholic. I'm not saying that there should be. I'm just saying this is the kind of the what do you call it? The litmus test of kind of where culture is today, especially Christianity today, is in America. We're just not concerned about that. We have other battles to fight. Remember, the mindset now is shifted toward secularism and atheism as the source of attack on Christianity. And it's moved completely, entirely away from the little horn, this sea beast, this papacy. It says in the next verse 13, he performs great signs. Speaking again still of the United States, and specifically I'll narrow it down a little bit more than the United States when I speak here in a few minutes. But he performs great signs so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in sight of the beast. In other words, as an endorsement of the beast that goes before him, that's with him. Telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. So he is going to ask for and seek, when it says he, this is the land beast, the United States, is going to seek legislation to impose some kind of worship. And he does this because of miracles and signs. Today, an atheist has an argument that he throws out there for the fact they're, in their minds, factual, no God, doesn't exist, don't believe in the supernatural, only the natural. Versus the theist who is Christian, believes in God, things are supernatural, so forth. What happens when miracles and signs in the open begin to happen? That cannot be denied as miracles. What happens to the atheist argument? It disappears. It goes away. You can't deny what's right in front of you. I mean, this is what science is supposed to be doing, right? We look at the evidence and we make our conclusions based upon the evidence. Well, if your evidence has always been there's nothing supernatural in the world, everything's natural, well, when you see the supernatural, what's going to happen? Your argument falls. So he performs these signs, and by these signs, American Christianity will say, this is God's will. We need to take America back. Let's do it now. When the sea beast, the papacy, is healed from its wound, this land beast, the USA, will act contrary to its constitution by uniting church and state and thus forming an image to the beast. What is image? What does image mean in Scripture? What is it a reference to? Character, right? Like somebody's image, they have characteristics. We're made in the image of God, okay? When we act in the Spirit of Christ, in the Spirit of God, that's another thing that reveals the image of God resides in us, right? So when it comes to these powers that are anti-Christ at its core, what is their image? Their image is to force and compel worship. Listen, God doesn't do that. He never forces anybody to worship him. That's not his nature or is his character. He's a God of love. Yet this will act in conflict with that, in contrary to that, in that it will seek to compel, to force worship upon its citizens in this country, and then we will see in a couple presentations how it then goes worldwide. Christians today are already we're seeing them using politics the best they can to bring America back to its moral condition for God. The challenge with that is you can't force somebody to be moral. You can write all kinds of laws about it, but you can't force it. And so using laws in the name of Christ to force morality it's a contradiction. The only thing that changes us from in here is the Spirit of the living God. It's Christ in us through his Spirit, making us more like him every day. The world, this country, let's start with this country first, it needs the true gospel. It needs the gospel of Jesus, that not only has he saved you, but he is sanctifying you every day by the change of your character and forming you in the image that he designed you to have when he first established creation. This is his purpose. This is his plan. And the devil hates it. The devil came at Eve to destroy that image. Well, he's still working, and this is his final battle to do the very same thing. So it doesn't surprise me that this alliance that comes together is exercising this authority to command and compel, to force worship, and in so doing it establishes an image to the beast. And why is it an image to that first beast? Because that's what the Church of Rome did for over 1,000 years. It compelled people to believe what they were told and to do what they were told. We talked about all that, so I'm not going to go back to that. Here's a quote from an editor of Liberty magazine in an editorial years ago, put very well. No power but that of love can rightfully compel the conscience. When religion becomes an affair of the law or of law, it ceases to become a matter of love. And that no one has a right to bind his own theology upon anyone's back but his own. This nation, actually the Constitution, it was built on religious freedom. And I disagree with those that say we're a Christian nation. No, we're a nation with a lot of Christians. We're not established as a Christian nation. In fact, most of the founders were deists. Okay? So it tells me you haven't looked at all your history if you're saying we're a Christian nation, we're founded that way. We were not. We were founded as a nation that did not want to repeat what Rome was doing in Europe, compelling worship a certain way. And look what's going to happen. It's going to come around anyway. That's what this is saying. Presently, arguments in American politics, left or right, seem irreconcilable. But they will unite at some point because they face a common enemy. And the reason I say this is because it's happened before. We see this in Scripture. Jesus, at his trial, before his crucifixion, he was being shipped back and forth between Pilate and Herod. I don't know if some of you know this story or not. But he's with Pilate first. Pilate's like, I don't want to deal with this thing. This is too much. And even at the advice of his wife, she's like, don't have anything to do with this, condemning this man. Sends him to Herod. Herod's just curious about him. Sends him back to Pilate. And listen to what it said about this whole thing going on. It says, then Herod, with his men of war, treated him with contempt and mocked him, arrayed him in a gorgeous robe, and sent him back to Pilate. So he was abusive to Christ before he sent him back to Pilate. Notice this, though. That very day, Pilate and Herod became friends with each other. For previously, they had been at enmity with each other. Do you think it's possible to be political enemies and then all of a sudden become friends? Oh, yeah. And who was their enemy when it happened? Jesus. How about the enemy when it happens again being the followers of Jesus? In truth, adhering and committed and obeying the Word of God. We have seen dramatic changes already in American Christianity. The dispensational narrative and the theology that's come out of that, of a soon-to-come millennial reign of Christ on earth, is fueling a growing effort to take America back for God. This is the worldview of a dispensationalist, okay? That when Jesus comes back, he will establish his kingdom on earth for 1,000 years. That's what they take from Scripture. We're going to cover this next weekend and what the Bible does say about that. But that's their mindset. That's what's driving them. This article comes from Christianity Today just a couple years ago, August 5, 2022. Here's what they said. The 2020 U.S. religion census, due out later this year, tallied 4,000 more non-denominational churches than in 2010. And non-denominational church attendance rose by 6.5 million during that time. Huge explosion of non-denominational churches. I don't know if you've really paid much attention to that, but, as a pastor and as you kind of keep your eye on the landscape, we've seen this going on for some time now. At the same time, mainline Protestant Christianity is collapsing. Following 5 decades of declines. In the mid-1970s, nearly a third of Americans were affiliated with denominations, but now just 1 in 10 are part of a mainline tradition. It's Christianity Today. So look at the chart. This is what's happening with mainline Christianity. It's in the blue. And what's going on with non-denominational churches. It's rising here. And one of the huge differences between them, especially mainline versus non-denominationals, evangelicals aren't non-denominational to some degree. There is overlap. Yes, I agree. But the big difference is dispensational theology. Another big difference is the way they worship and the kind of worship. It's an appeal, as I said, to an emotional response. It's how you feel when you come into church, and that determines where you go to church. Do you know what the fundamental idea of worship is? It's what we give to God when we come together. It's not how he makes us feel. Because sometimes he makes us feel we need more of him, right? Our week hasn't been that great. We need that healing touch from him. Lord, we need you. But it always brings a response of thanksgiving and praise to God for what he's doing. Not, how does this worship service make me feel? Whether it's music or the message or whatever it is. That's a big fuel for non-denominational growth. L. Hardy spent several years researching the non-denominational movement, mostly neo-charismatic Pentecostalism. In her book titled Beyond Belief, she writes these words. It's about a shift, she said, toward kingdom now theology. meaning that believers have to start doing everything they can to create the world for Christ to rule over. Instead of fretting over interpretations of the book of Revelation and what will happen when those events come to pass, Pentecostals are increasingly concerned with the here and now, particularly with the overarching idea that secular society is taking over the world and they need to fight back. This is the mindset fueling American Christianity today. At least the rapidly growing American Christianity, which is also, as we know, affecting politics in America today. Three primary themes driving this more aggressive brand of Christianity is dominion, the idea that God established America as a Christian nation, and it's his dominion, and we need to take it back. The second one is spiritual warfare. If you're out there and you don't believe in God, you have a demon. And their job is to cast demons out and to work these miracles of making sure that people are delivered from demonic oppression and other things. I mean, there's elements of that are happening, but this just goes overboard with that. And then thirdly, eschatology, end times, specifically from the futurist perspective. So it's creating kind of this millennial madness. Christ is coming back. We've got to fight to take back America for God, so when he comes, he has a place to come, and then we can rule with him for 1,000 years. There are three parts, I believe, in this passage that Jesus brings. These same three things are repeated in his words that we haven't really historically thought of as prophetic, but I think there's a slant to it in this, and it's found in Matthew 7:22 and 23. Listen to these words from Jesus. This is on the Sermon on the Mount. This is toward the end of the Sermon on the Mount, and he says this: "Many will say to me in that day, 'Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied,'" number one, "prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness." Means you're not keeping my law. All right, so the three things, back to the chart again. The three things from that passage we find are repeated in the belief system in today's brand of American Christianity. You have prophesying that happens, claiming to speak for God. You have casting out demons, this engagement in spiritual warfare, and the demons of the secular atheist culture. That's where they think most of the demons are lying. And miraculous working of the Holy Spirit, that God is igniting a revival. Let me tell you what an opportunity the devil has to deceive when you think that anything that is a miracle that attends to you or that endorses you, what you believe, is from God. More on that here next weekend as well. Okay, so in contrast, I'm shifting gears now. We're transitioning toward the end here of the message tonight. In contrast to this, Revelation 14 describes the message that is going out to the world that God has sent. And this message is seen with three angels. Three different angels that are proclaiming to the world these messages. And I'm going to have to speed up a little bit because my time is getting short here. I'm trying to keep these things to an hour. But the first message, after introducing these 144,000, these are the faithful people of God. They're not tainted by doctrine, but they're pure and they're focused on the Word of God and obeying it. After that, we'll go to Revelation, the next passage in 14, which is verse 6. "Then I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth." And it lists to everybody here. So this is contrary to the far-reaching authority that is being asserted by the alliance, the Antichrist alliance. So now this is God's people who are to preach this throughout the world, the true everlasting gospel. And it says, saying with a loud voice, "Fear God and give glory to him. For the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea, and springs of water. There it is, worship again. Don't worship anything else. Worship him, your creator. And then the next angel, verse 8. An angel saying, Babylon is fallen, is fallen. We won't talk a lot about Babylon here. We really won't talk anything about it tonight because I'm going to cover this on, I think, next Friday night. But it's saying here, this first proclamation, that it is fallen. So be careful. And then lastly, verses 9 and 10, the third angel's crying with a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast or his image and receives his mark on his forehead or on his hand, he himself shall also drink of the wine of the wrath of God. Okay, a warning. This is part of the three angels' messages that are being sent to all the world. I'd like to think I'm part of proclaiming that message, those messages. But there's a last piece of this third angel that I want you to look at here briefly. And it comes in verse 12. Here is the patience of the saints. In other words, here it is. You want to see him? Here is the patience of the saints during this difficult time of trouble. Here are those who, number one, keep the commandments of God, and number two, and the faith of Jesus. Contrary to the dispensation of law, where it's all about keeping the law, and grace, where it's only about grace and faith, we find that you can keep the commandments of God through faith that Jesus gives you. Amen? You know, you're not a legalist to keep the commandments of God. It's not like, oh, you're being a legalist because you're a commandment keeper. Well, so I choose not to stop stealing and lying and murdering and stuff. So I'm a legalist for that, right? Oh, no, you know what I mean. We keep the commandments of God through the faith that Jesus instills in us and gives us power to do, right? That's what it's saying here. Instead of this message demanding worship, there's this patience of the saints and a commitment to obedience to God, and that happens through the faith that he has given us through Jesus. Clear contrast between the two. Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. Okay? That's God's way. Love motivates us to obedience, to keep God's commandments. But in contrast to that, listen to this system. This is my second to the last verse here tonight. This is wrapping up Revelation 13. Verse 15, it says, he, this is now again the beast, the second beast from the land, from the earth, he was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as who would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. He causes all, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, denoting, and this isn't a physical mark, the right hand denoting, I'll just go along with it, the forehead denoting, I believe it and I'm supporting it, okay? A mark on their right hand or on their forehead, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. They're going to get serious about forcing worship, compelling worship, and they're going to do this through removing the ability to buy or sell, and also under threat of death. Listen, if we think this can't happen again, you're not looking far back enough in history. 1,000 plus years of this kind of tyranny. It's going to happen again. And I used to preach long ago about things that would happen in the future. More I find myself today preaching about things that we're seeing start to happen. Okay? This doesn't sound ridiculous anymore, especially when you start hearing things like, we're going to create a cashless society. So you have to access your bank accounts and the things you do to transact business and other things. These kinds of things create, in my mind, like, okay, that's how you remove someone's ability to access their funds, their wealth. They can't buy or sell. I could go into lots of stuff. I'm trying not to get too sidetracked here. I want to end with these words, because those are sobering words. But these words are big words of hope. Again, from Jesus, as he met with the woman at the well, as he talked with her, a Samaritan woman sent the disciples away and spent this time, and listen to what he says to her. Because the issue between the Samaritans and the Jews, there was a huge fraction between them. And Jesus, I think, instilled hope in her with these words. Listen to this. The hour is coming, Jesus said, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father is seeking such to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. We need the Spirit of the living God residing in us to worship in this way. To worship everything we do in the name of Christ is an act of worship for him, right? It is seen as obedience to him and a testimony that we serve the living God and that he is our God and none other. But also the truth is the other part of this scale. It's important that we seek the truth and that we follow it, and that our worship is in harmony with God's word. Do you believe it? This is why the patience of the saints in the last days are the ones who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. That's essentially the gospel. That's righteousness by faith right there. And that he promises to each and every one of us today. I want to worship God in spirit and truth. How about you? How about you? Bow your heads with me. Father in heaven, some amazing things here in your word that you have revealed, and we're already beginning to see these things begin to happen. But Lord, what we want to do now here as we conclude this meeting tonight is focus our eyes on Jesus. To turn to our Father as well in heaven. Because as the fight rages on for worship, we want to make sure that our worship is of you and you alone. And so, Lord, we pray that you'd pour out your Spirit in us to help us to obey you, to lead us down the path of obedience and righteousness in Christ, who has given us everything that we need to stand strong. The faith that belonged to him, he gives to us. But also, as we see the things happening around this world, may we know that you are with us, you stand with us, and you will help us to be faithful. We want to be part of that 144,000, that symbolic number of the faithful in the last days. We want to stand with them, faithful to you. And so, Lord, help us to do that. That is our desire. And so we invite you to help us in that battle to stick to truth, to stick with Jesus and never let go. In his name, we ask and pray. And for his sake and his church's sake, let us all say, amen.